Last time on Pixel Pilot, we had to go and hunt down those massive missile launchers that the rebels were using to attack the civilian city of El Arish. It took us a while, but we found them, and we were able to destroy 3 launchers, which halved the number of attacks overnight. While we were busy hunting the Scud launchers, the Tomcats went after a weapons cache about 150 kilometers to the north of our position. But because Nordy, our glorious and courageous leader, is completely incompetent and doesn't know what the fuck he's doing, the bombs missed their target. So we're being sent out there tonight to finish the job. A couple of the other Hornets are going to be responsible for destroying that weapons cache, whereas I'll be dropping laser-guided bombs marked by an Apache attack helicopter onto high-priority targets in the area. So let's get going. Case 3 departure means we can't see shit. Smiley is the first man off the boat, so I need to find him and join up. The trouble is, he's climbed up to 25,000 feet, which is way too high. See, the higher you go, the thinner the air, and the harder it is to turn and maintain speed, which means it takes way too long for us to form up. So that was one of the first things they grilled us on in the debrief. And these minor delays may seem trivial, but they do have a spillover effect. We're supposed to do a visual inspection of each other's planes before we reach the end of what's called carrier-controlled airspace. That's a 50-mile ring around the boat. In the sim, it's unlikely we'd ever actually see a problem, but in real life, they're looking for things like fluid leaks, loose panels, issues with the bombs mounted to the wings, any damage that might have happened during takeoff, and obviously if there was a problem, you don't want to be too far away from the only place you can land, which is, of course, the boat. In our case, we took so long that we blew through CCA before completing our checks, which isn't very professional. Anyway, we have a long commute to the office tonight, so I want to give you a sense of where we're going. The weapons cache is located just northeast of a place called Nekhel, which is the capital of the North Sinai Governorate in Egypt. Now, of course, I didn't know any of this at the time. As the obedient little military drone that I am, all I knew was that I had to go to these coordinates, drop some bombs, and then fly home for beers and high fives with the boys. But I'm a curious guy, and I wanted to know if there was anything interesting about this place. Bearing in mind my knowledge of the Middle East is so limited that I couldn't tell you what the difference is between all of these DCS maps, Sinai, Syria, and the Persian Gulf. They're all basically the same place in my mind, like that's how ignorant I am. So I started doing some research, and as it turns out, Nekhel is actually a bit of a big fucking deal in the history books. For example, the ancient pharaohs used to mine things like turquoise, gold, and copper there, and there are still preserved ruins of mines and temples from that era. It used to be one of the main stops on the Hajj route for pilgrims making their way towards Mecca, and it's said that the road was infested with hyenas that were feeding on dead camels that had fallen by the wayside. In the Middle Ages, several sultans built forts and castles in Nekhel to defend Egypt from the Crusades. The ruins of one of these forts is still there today, and I found these beautiful photographs taken sometime between 1920 and 1933. It's unclear to me when the fortress was actually destroyed. Burton Bernstein, brother of the legendary conductor and composer Leonard Bernstein, was a staff writer at the New York Times and wrote a book called Sinai, the Great and Terrible Wilderness. I don't have a copy of it, but in it supposedly says that the fortress was blown up by the Turkish army in World War I, sometime before July 1917. But these photos, said to have been taken in November of 1956, seem to show it in pretty good shape, even though this is supposedly right after it had been subjected to Israeli airstrikes and artillery bombardment. In any case, it's looking a lot better than it is today. And even if you're not into history, Nekhel and the surrounding region is home to some amazing animals, including the Sinai agama, the Nubian ibex, and these cute little guys, the rock hyraxes. There was one quote I read about Sinai that I found particularly haunting. Despite the thousands of armies that left tracks in the sands of the Sinai, the landscape bears small testimony to the dreams and conquest of the men who crossed it. It is indeed a harsh-looking place. Alright, here we go. We've got our first bomb drop here. We're using laser-guided GBU-12, so all this dive bombing is a bit unnecessary, but it looks kinda cool. But let's zoom out here so you can get a better idea of how this all works, because it is all quite structured. There's us, there's IKEA in his Apache helicopter, lasing our targets for us, and all those targets are in this general area over here. There's something called an IP, or an ingress point, and that's a specified point on the map from which we start our attack, and you can see we've come in from the east here. Now, because there's SPAG, or self-propelled aircraft guns, in the area, we can't afford to get too low, otherwise we'll risk getting shot down. We were directed to egress to the north, and we're supposed to return to the IP, but I forget to change my reference waypoint, so I end up flying straight over the target area again, which is not great because it adds unnecessary risk and delays the whole operation. But then things get worse because on my second run, my old friend the master arm switch strikes again, and I fail to get any bombs off, which means I have to do another big loop to come around and try again. It's quite embarrassing when these things happen because it takes about 5 minutes to do another loop, and you have to call in on the radio and tell everyone what an idiot you are. Third time's the charm, we get all the bombs off, and now it's time to go home. It almost all goes to plan, except I get waved off at the carrier and my jet runs out of fuel before I can hook up to the tanker, leaving me with no option but to eject. Goodbye, $80 million plane. Goodbye, Navy career. Hello, dishonorable discharge.
What you should have done was land your plane. You don't own that plane, the taxpayers do.